Monitor John Madden in my open window in the Hotel Mari Tierra overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Veracruz, listening to the waves. I've been in the hotel for, I think this is my 4th day now, and starting with the 2nd day back in Veracruz after 7 weeks in Orizaba. And yesterday I realized that the way I am riveted to this open window is structurally much like an experience I had back in Asheville probably 15 years ago. I went there in '04. For the first 3 years I was super broke and stayed in a boarding house. And during those 3 years I was hospitalized for suicidal depression at least twice of the 15 times altogether in 30 years from when I was wrongly diagnosed in my early 40s to when I finally had a spiritual experience that snapped me out of it in my early 70s. Psychologist myself, I had experienced a perfect storm of life crises in my early 40s, which a spiritual coach could have not only gotten me through, but used as a chance to really wake up, because when things fall apart is a chance to put them back together in a better way. And there's a teacher, a transpersonal psychologist named Stanislav Grof, wrote the book The Stormy Search for Self, where he says that if things fall apart, if career and family are no longer working, which was my situation in Cincinnati, Ohio, it's a chance to wake up to what's underneath that, to realize that the real search for self is to find out who we are underneath all that persona stuff. But in our modern society, there's no genuine spiritual teachers, mostly religious people, priests, ministers, are teaching you rules and don't understand spirituality at all. And so you get taken to the doctors, who are the shamans of our modern industrial era, and they take you to the psychiatrist. And I was trained alongside psychiatrists when I got trained as a clinical psychologist, and I saw that they were unthinking, that they were in it for the money and the power. And for sure they knew nothing about trauma. When I was trained as a psychologist in the 70s, we didn't get trained about trauma. So where they could see trauma needing release and healing, they see behaviors that they know how to attach a made-up label to, and then give some kind of drug that by just trial and error, they've come up with drugs that they think help a little. And I know now that even my psychiatrist, one wonderful psychiatrist, Dave Manley, said to me, well, maybe 5%, they might, most they'll do is help 5% usually, but if it keeps you from committing suicide, you'll maybe take the bargain. And I kept taking that bargain because I did not, as desperately as I wanted to commit suicide, I loved other people enough that I didn't want to do that to them, although I had attempted once. So in that first 3 years in Asheville, I was twice hospitalized at the Mission Hospital in Asheville at the Copestone unit. L. Ralph Jones was a deep intellectual head psychiatrist, such a cold fish that he really believed that electroshock treatments were an extremely powerful way to help people with depression. I was trained as a psychologist in the 70s, and I knew it was barbarism back then, and certainly in the 2000s. L. Ralph Jones convinced me that it had gotten so sophisticated that it could help, and every year of the 30 years I got worse and worse, and I was desperate for something to help, so I let them administer those to me. The first time, maybe my second year in Asheville, I had probably 30 treatments, maybe 10 on the inpatient unit or 5 on the inpatient unit, and many more as an outpatient. And the deleterious effects were subtle. I started realizing that I was losing my short-term memory and stopped. When I went back in another year later, I was maybe even more desperate, and a young associate of L. Ralph Jones convinced me, no, now we use microshocks. It's much less likely to give you any harm. And again, I was so desperate, I tried again. And they gave me 3 treatments about 2 days apart on the inpatient unit. And they send you into essentially an epileptic seizure, and also administer drugs so you don't break bones, you don't go into a full grand mal seizure. And they paired with L. Ralph Jones a nurse administering it, and as the poison is going into your arm, she's rubbing your arm and looking at you very sweetly and saying, honey, you're just going to go to sleep for a little while, you're going to be fine, that's the last thing you see before you go out. But that time, they discharged me the same day as my 3rd treatment, and I went home to my room in the boarding house and fell asleep and snapped. And when I woke up, I was psychotic, essentially. I believed that my soul had left my body and was wandering around the earth somewhere, and if I sat for 3 days, pretty much without sleep, in the same open window and kept my radio tuned to the same station, there would be a chance that my soul would find its way back. And the first 24, maybe 36 hours were not as bad because I was just gone. It was about the end of the second day that I was starting to snap out of it enough to realize that I was totally cracked. And then it was really terrifying. And eventually it passed, and 3 or 4 days later I went back to that unit and talked to that assistant head psychiatrist and told him what happened. And he looked me square in the eye and said, it doesn't do that. It wouldn't do that. It's you. There's something wrong with you. You must have an underlying psychotic process that got released. Talk about adding insult to injury, piling on the victim. They told me I was even sicker than they had ever told me before. I knew that he was lying. I knew that he was wrong, but I sure didn't get any satisfaction. So this isn't that. This isn't that. I don't have any desire to jump, although this window is like 5 feet tall. You could drive a truck through it almost. And it's a long ways down. I don't have any impulse to do that because I love my life and I'm happy all the time for the last 4 years. And I'm super happy to be back in Veracruz. And I've got a bird's eye view of my beloved port, where I'm intending to set up a life for myself. Somewhat recently traumatized because my car was stolen up in Orizaba in the mountains, and my lifestyle of 4 years is gone, along with all my stuff, all my clothes, everything. But I'm embracing it because I know that car was an albatross around my neck. It was very old and so expensive to keep on the road. And even before I ran up to Orizaba here in Veracruz, where I was saying I love it here so much, I don't think I want to make any plans to travel at all. I knew I was really tired from 4 years on the road and wanted to get the ground under me again. So my check, my monthly check, which never lasts a month when I'm paying hundreds and thousands of dollars for car repairs and tow straps and jumper cables, and it should last longer, and I can find an apartment and rebuild a life. I've had a wonderful life for 4 years, but it's time. It's time for a real sea change in my life. All that's been shocking, and I've been really happy to have the bird's eye view and chance to listen to all the different sources of music around Veracruz, from the cars and people's Bluetooth speakers on the beach. It'll get quieter. It's only like, I think, 10:30 now. I went to bed quite early. Yeah, it's different. It's not that. It's trauma. I've got trauma. But I'm solid inside. Unshakable, actually. Okay, go back.